On October 9, 1972, in a fourth-floor apartment on Rue de l'Université in Paris, a young woman with the assumed name of Genevieve Lambert carefully unpacked a set of professional-grade photographic enlargers. To any observer, she was the very picture of a budding artist, a Canadian photojournalist seeking to capture the soul of the city. The faint, acrid scent of developing chemicals that would soon permeate the small flat was part of this carefully constructed reality. But the enlargers had been modified in a workshop in Tel Aviv, their hollowed-out bases containing not spare bulbs, but sophisticated listening devices and frequency scanners. The woman, whose real name was known to only 3 individuals outside of that room, was not an artist. She was a Katza, a field intelligence officer for the Mossad, and her apartment was not a studio but the nascent nerve center for a state-sanctioned act of retribution, the first of its kind on European soil. Her mission, and the mission of the clandestine organization she served, was to transform the grief and rage that followed the Munich Olympics massacre into a cold, precise, and lethally effective instrument of national policy. The darkroom she was assembling was designed not to develop images of Parisian life, but to process surveillance intelligence and serve as the staging ground for a targeted assassination. The strategic problem facing Israel in the autumn of 1972 was one of profound and unprecedented crisis, a wound inflicted not on a battlefield but in the global arena of the Olympic Games. The murder of 11 Israeli athletes and officials by the Palestinian militant group Black September had been broadcast across the world, a spectacle of terror that traditional statecraft seemed powerless to address. The surviving terrorists had been flown to Libya and hailed as heroes after a hijacked Lufthansa flight secured their release from German custody, a capitulation that underscored the impotence of conventional diplomatic and legal channels. For Prime Minister Golda Meir and her inner circle, the Munich massacre represented an existential threat that transcended the immediate loss of life. It was a demonstration that Israeli citizens were not safe anywhere and that international institutions were either unwilling or unable to deliver justice. The decision was made in a series of secret, grief-laden meetings that the rules of engagement had irrevocably changed. Israel would no longer wait for other nations to act. It would hunt down every individual connected to the planning and execution of the Munich attack, wherever they might be. This directive, which came to be known as Operation Wrath of God, presented the Mossad with an immense operational challenge. Its targets were not soldiers in a conventional army but members of a decentralized, clandestine network embedded within civilian populations across Europe and the Middle East. They operated under aliases, used front organizations, and were protected by a sympathetic diaspora and, in some cases, the tacit acquiescence of host governments. Previous methods of intelligence gathering and counterterrorism, which relied on border security and regional surveillance, were wholly inadequate for this new, global battlefield. The escalation was therefore not merely a choice but a necessity born of failure, the failure of international law, the failure of diplomacy, and the failure of existing security protocols to prevent the slaughter in the first place. The response had to be as unconventional and far-reaching as the threat itself. The first name on the list provided to the newly formed Kaidan unit, the Mossad Specialized Assassination Division, was that of Mahmoud Hamshari. Publicly, Hamshari was the official representative of the Palestine Liberation Organization in France, a polished, articulate, and well-regarded figure in Parisian intellectual and diplomatic circles. He was fluent in French, lived with his wife and daughter in a respectable apartment on Rue d'Elysia, and frequently gave interviews to the European press, presenting a moderate and reasonable face for the Palestinian cause. This public persona, however, was a meticulously crafted facade. Israeli intelligence, compiled from human sources within the PLO, signals intelligence intercepts, and debriefings of captured militants, painted a very different picture. They had assessed with a high degree of confidence that Hamshari was, in fact, the leader of Black September in France. He was not a foot soldier but a logistician and planner, responsible for coordinating the movement of weapons and operatives, managing finances, and selecting targets for attacks throughout Europe. He was believed to have been directly involved in the logistical preparations for Munich, using his diplomatic cover and extensive contacts to facilitate the operation. His significance lay in his dual nature. He was both a symbol of the PLO's attempt at political legitimacy and a key operational node in its most violent clandestine wing. This made him a particularly challenging target. He was not a reclusive fanatic hiding in a training camp but a public figure integrated into the fabric of a major Western capital. Any action against him would take place on the soil of a friendly, albeit often difficult, nation. It would need to be executed with surgical precision to avoid collateral damage and, just as importantly, to maintain a veneer of plausible deniability. Eliminating Hamshari was not just about removing a threat, it was about sending an unequivocal message to the entire PLO leadership that diplomatic credentials and a European address offered no sanctuary. The challenge was to penetrate his carefully managed life without alerting French security services, his own bodyguards, or the wider Palestinian network in Paris that he was being systematically targeted for elimination. The solution proposed within the Mossad Caesarea department was as audacious as it was perilous. It rejected the idea of a simple, deniable hit-and-run attack, which was deemed too crude and likely to result in civilian casualties or the capture of the operatives. Instead, the plan called for the establishment of a semi-permanent intelligence and operational infrastructure inside Paris itself. This would involve embedding a team of Qotzes under deep cover for an extended period, allowing them to conduct the painstaking surveillance required for a sophisticated, high-precision operation. This approach, codenamed Operation Damocles' Sword, was a radical departure from the Mossad's typical modus operandi of swift, targeted incursions. It meant operating for months in a high-surveillance environment, under the constant risk of exposure by the French Domestic Intelligence Service, the DST, which was notoriously effective and deeply suspicious of foreign intelligence activities on its soil. The core of the plan was to build a complete, self-contained operational cell that could function autonomously, from intelligence gathering to execution and exfiltration. The obstacles were formidable. Linguistically and culturally, the operatives had to be flawless, capable of blending seamlessly into Parisian life. Technically, they needed a method of assassination that was both certain in its effect on the target and minimal in its impact on the surroundings. Psychologically, the operatives had to withstand the immense pressure of prolonged deep cover work, the isolation, the constant vigilance, and the moral weight of their assignment. The greatest risk was diplomatic. If the team were caught and their connection to the Israeli government proven, the resulting international incident would be catastrophic, potentially shattering Israel's relationship with France and other key European allies, and lending credence to accusations of state-sponsored terrorism. The proposal was, in essence, to wage a secret war in the heart of a peaceful, allied city, a high-stakes gamble where the consequences of failure were almost too great to contemplate. Yet, given the mandate from the highest levels of government, it was a gamble the Mossad was ordered to take. The technological and tactical preparation for the operation against Mahmoud Hamshari was a case study in meticulous, bespoke design. The Qaidan unit, working with the Mossad's Technical Operations Division, Neviat, evaluated and discarded several methods of attack. A car bomb was too indiscriminate. A sniper attack was difficult in a dense urban environment and left behind ballistic evidence. A direct assault was too risky for the operatives. They settled on a method that was both elegant and terrifyingly intimate, a bomb triggered remotely by telephone. The core of this plan was the development of a device that could be covertly installed inside Hamshari's own telephone. The technical specialists in Tel Aviv began with a standard French PTT model telephone, the same type used in Parisian apartments in the early 1970s. They painstakingly disassembled it, mapping out every millimeter of available space within its bakelite casing. Their goal was to insert an explosive charge and a detonation mechanism without altering the phone's weight, balance, or function in any discernible way. The explosive chosen was a small, precisely shaped charge of RDX, a military-grade plastic explosive selected for its stability and high brisance. The charge weighed less than 100 grams, but it was shaped with a copper liner to create a focused blast effect, directing the force upwards and outwards from the earpiece, ensuring maximum lethality for the person holding the receiver to their head while minimizing structural damage to the apartment. The detonation mechanism was even more sophisticated. It was not a simple timer or a wire-based trigger. It was a frequency-actuated receiver, a tiny circuit board designed to respond to a specific, unique audio tone transmitted down the telephone line. This two-part system provided a critical layer of safety and certainty. The bomb could not be detonated by a random phone call, it required a specific signal from the operational team. To install this device, the team needed access to Hamshari's apartment, a near impossibility. The solution came from exploiting the state-run telecommunications system. An operative, posing as a technician from the French PTT, would be dispatched to repair a non-existent fault on Hamshari's line. This required a separate team to create a minor but noticeable disruption on the line originating from the local telephone exchange, providing the perfect pretext. The technician would have a window of only a few minutes to enter the apartment, swap Hamshari's telephone with the pre-prepared, weaponized duplicate, and leave without arousing suspicion. Every tool in his kit, from his uniform to his identification card, was a perfect forgery, created by the Mossad's Documents Division. The final piece of the tactical puzzle was the confirmation protocol. Before sending the detonation tone, the team had to be 100% certain that Hamshari, and not his wife or daughter, was the one answering the phone. This would be achieved by having a French-speaking operative place a call and, under the guise of a journalist, engage the target in a brief conversation, asking a specific question to which only he would know the answer, thereby confirming his identity before terminating the call and clearing the way for the trigger team. The operative selected for the role of Genevieve Lambert, the photojournalist who would establish the Parisian safe house, was a woman named Dahlia Cohen. This was not her real name, but one of several identities she inhabited. Dahlia's recruitment profile was exemplary, representing the new generation of Mossad officers sought for European operations. Born in Argentina to parents who were diplomats, she was a native speaker of Spanish and fluent in English, French, and Hebrew. Her upbringing had given her a natural ease in cosmopolitan settings and an innate understanding of cultural nuances that could not be taught. Psychologically, she was assessed as possessing an exceptionally high degree of emotional compartmentalization, an ability to separate her operational persona from her core identity, and a profound tolerance for prolonged periods of social isolation. Her motivation was deeply personal. A cousin had been on one of the planes hijacked by the PFLP in 1970, an event that had transformed her political consciousness from abstract ideology into a cold, personal conviction. Her training was rigorous and multifaceted. She spent 6 months at the Mossad's training academy, known as the Madrasa, where she mastered the fundamentals of tradecraft, surveillance and counter-surveillance techniques, dead drop and brush pass protocols, the art of eliciting information without asking direct questions. She underwent intensive physical conditioning, focusing on Krav Maga for unarmed combat and defensive driving skills for urban environments. Her specialized training, however, was in deep cover identity management. For weeks, she lived as Genevieve Lambert, not just in simulations but in the real world, in a controlled environment in Israel. She learned photography, not just as a hobby but as a profession, studying the works of Henri Cartier-Bresson and Robert Doisneau, learning to discuss f-stops and shutter speeds with genuine authority. She was trained to defeat polygraph examinations and to withstand interrogation, using a layered system of cover stories that would peel away to reveal progressively more serious, but still false, levels of complicity, buying time for an extraction team. The final phase of her preparation was psychological conditioning, where case officers worked to strip away her reliance on external validation, reinforcing her ability to operate with complete autonomy, trusting only her training and her handler. She was being forged into a human weapon, a thinking, adaptable instrument of state will, capable of living a lie for months on end in the service of a single, lethal objective. The construction of the cover identity, or legend, for Genevieve Lambert was an exercise in obsessive detail, a process the Mossad referred to as building a hologram. It began with the foundation, a genuine Canadian birth certificate, obtained from a deceased infant who would have been Dahlia's age, a common practice for intelligence agencies seeking to create untraceable identities. Upon this foundation, a lifetime of documentation was fabricated. A Canadian passport was produced by the Mossad's forgery unit, flawless down to the watermarks and the specific type of thread used in the binding. It contained entry and exit stamps from various countries, corresponding to a meticulously crafted travel history that would stand up to scrutiny. A driver's license, a press card from a small but legitimate Montreal-based news syndicate, university transcripts from McGill University where she supposedly studied art history, and letters of credit from a Canadian bank were all created and inserted into the relevant databases by Mossad's network of Syanim, or volunteer Jewish helpers, who worked in low-level bureaucratic positions around the world. The legend was more than just paper, it was a life. Dahlia created a portfolio of photographs, street scenes from Montreal, landscapes from the Rockies, that were genuinely her own work, developed during her training. This portfolio was her reason for being in Paris. She had correspondence, letters from family and friends in Canada, which were actually written by other Mossad officers and posted internationally to her mail drop, creating a pattern of normal communication. Her apartment was filled with props that reinforced her identity, books on photography and French art, Canadian novels on her bedside table, a specific brand of maple syrup in her kitchen. Even her behavior was scripted. She established a routine, visiting the same cafe every morning, frequenting art galleries, and making tentative inquiries at photo agencies, all the mundane activities of a real person building a life in a new city. This pattern of normalcy was her primary defense, designed to make her invisible to the constant, low-level surveillance conducted by domestic security services on foreign nationals. She was instructed to be unremarkable, pleasant but slightly reserved, the kind of person who leaves no lasting impression. Every detail, no matter how small, was designed to withstand a sudden, intense background check, to ensure that if a light was ever shown on Genevieve Lambert, it would reveal nothing but the quiet, aspiring artist she claimed to be. Dahlia Cohen, now fully inhabiting the persona of Genevieve Lambert, arrived at Charles de Gaulle Airport in late October 1972. Her insertion into Paris was deliberately uneventful. She took a taxi to a pre-arranged short-term rental, a place she would occupy for only 2 weeks while she conducted the ritual of apartment hunting. This was a critical phase of the operation, designed to mimic the genuine experience of a newcomer. She met with real estate agents, viewed several apartments, and engaged in the customary negotiations, all the while being shadowed by a Mossad counter-surveillance team who were checking for any sign that she had been flagged by French authorities upon entry. After 12 days, she found the apartment on Rue de l'Université, which had been secretly secured for her months in advance by a scion working in real estate. She signed a 1-year lease, paid her deposit, and began the slow, deliberate process of turning the empty flat into the mission's forward operating base. Her first weeks were a study in operational patience. She did not approach the target or his known associates. Instead, she focused entirely on solidifying her cover. She bought furniture, opened a bank account, registered with the local prefecture, and enrolled in a French-language course at the Alliance Française, despite already being a fluent speaker. This last act was a classic piece of tradecraft. It provided a legitimate reason for her presence in the city, created a network of casual acquaintances, and offered a structured, verifiable schedule that accounted for her time. Her handler communicated with her through a system of dead drops. Every Tuesday, she would leave a roll of undeveloped film at a specific camera shop. The roll would be collected by a courier, processed at a separate location where a microdot message would be read, and a new roll containing her instructions would be left for her to pick up the following day. All the while, from the window of her 4th-floor apartment, she began the first, passive stage of surveillance, using a powerful telephoto lens, part of her professional equipment, to photograph the comings and goings at a building across the river that was a known PLO meeting point, building a pattern-of-life analysis for the broader network to which Hamsheri belonged. As winter settled over Paris, the operation moved into its active phase. The surveillance on Mahmoud Hamsheri intensified, becoming a 24-hour, multi-layered effort. Dahlia's role shifted from establishing cover to active intelligence gathering, though always from a distance. A separate 3-person surveillance team, composed of Mossad operatives who had entered France as tourists on various European passports, was now on the ground. They were the foot followers, tasked with physically tracking Hamsheri from the moment he left his apartment until he returned. Their communication was a silent, intricate dance. The primary operative would follow Hamsheri, never looking directly at him, using reflections in shop windows to monitor his movements. At intersections, a second operative would pick up the tail. The handover communicated with a subtle, prearranged signal, adjusting a pair of glasses, or shifting a newspaper from one hand to the other. A third operative acted as counter-surveillance, following the first two, watching for anyone who might be watching them. Dahlia's apartment, the static observation post, served as the collection point for their data. At the end of each day, a team member would make a chalk mark on a specific post box, signaling that a report was ready for collection. Dahlia would then proceed to a predetermined dead drop location, a loose brick in a garden wall, the water tank of a public toilet, to retrieve the intelligence. She would then collate the reports, cross-referencing times and locations, building a detailed timeline of the target's life. They mapped his routines, his daily walk to the PLO office, his weekly lunch with a journalist from Le Monde, his wife's shopping schedule, his daughter's school hours. They identified a critical vulnerability. Hamshari often worked from home in the mornings, taking calls before leaving for his office around noon. This was the window. The technical team, now in Paris and operating from a separate safe house, finalized their plan. A scion working inside the French PTT was activated. He reported a recurring signal fault affecting the phone line on Rue d'Elysia, ensuring that the eventual repair call would not seem unusual. The stage was being meticulously set, each piece moving into place with the silent precision of a chess master. The waiting was the most difficult part, a period of sustained, nerve-wracking tension, where the slightest mistake or deviation from routine could unravel the entire operation. On the morning of December 8, 1972, the final phase of the operation was initiated. At 8:05 a.m., the Mossad's technical operative, dressed in the blue uniform of a PTT telephone repairman and carrying a standard-issue toolkit, rang the doorbell of Mahmoud Hamshari's apartment. The operative, a seasoned veteran of numerous infiltration missions, explained to Hamshari's wife that he was there to investigate a reported line interference and improve the reception. The pretext was perfect, the forged work order and identification flawless. He was invited inside. While Hamshari's wife made him a cup of coffee, the operative went to work on the telephone in the hallway. His movements were efficient and practiced. He disconnected the existing phone, placing it in his bag. From his toolkit, he removed the identical, weaponized model. The connection took less than 90 seconds. He then performed a series of diagnostic checks, making a test call to a prearranged dead number, demonstrating to the unsuspecting woman that the repair was successful and the line was now perfectly clear. He thanked her for the coffee and left the apartment, having been inside for a total of 7 minutes. He walked 2 blocks, entered the back of a waiting delivery van, and discarded the uniform and toolkit. The weapon was now in place, lying dormant inside the target's home. The surveillance team, positioned discreetly around the building, confirmed via coded radio transmission that Hamshari was still inside the apartment. The trigger team, located in a different safe house several kilometers away, connected their specialized tone-generating equipment to a dedicated telephone line. All that remained was the final confirmation. At 9:15 a.m., an Italian journalist, also a Mossad operative, placed a call to Hamshari's number. When Hamshari answered, the operative, speaking fluent French, asked to speak with him about an upcoming article. He asked a specific, prearranged question to confirm his identity. Hamshari answered as expected. The operative then apologized, claiming he had been given the wrong information and would call back later. He hung up. This was the go signal. The information was relayed instantly to the trigger team. The leader of the unit took a deep breath, and gave the order. A technician pressed a button, sending a 5 kHz audio burst down the line to Hamshari's apartment. Inside the telephone on Rue d'Elysia, the frequency-actuated receiver recognized the tone and closed a circuit, sending an electrical charge to the detonator. The explosion was not large, but it was incredibly violent and precisely focused. The shaped charge performed exactly as designed, propelling a superheated jet of molten copper and gas upwards through the phone's earpiece and into Mahmoud Hamshari's head. The concussion shattered the windows of the apartment and blew the front door off its hinges, but the structural damage to the building was minimal. Hamshari was thrown across the room, mortally wounded. The operation's primary objective had been achieved. In the immediate aftermath, Dahlia Cohen's training took over, a series of pre-planned, automatic actions designed for self-preservation and the sanitization of the operational site. She did not wait to hear news reports. The moment the execution was confirmed by a single click on a secure radio channel, she began her exfiltration protocol. She moved through her apartment with calm efficiency. All operational materials, surveillance notes, photographs, codebooks, were incinerated in a small, high-temperature brazier she kept in her fireplace. The ashes were then pulverized and flushed down the toilet. The modified photographic equipment was wiped clean of fingerprints, disassembled, and packed into a suitcase. She wiped down every surface in the apartment, doorknobs, light switches, window sills, faucets, with a special chemical solution that removed all traces of latent fingerprints. She took a shower, washing away any potential DNA evidence, and changed into a new set of clothes that she had never worn before in Paris. The Genevieve Lambert persona, with all its carefully constructed details, was being systematically erased. 45 minutes after the explosion on Rue d'Elysia, she walked out of the apartment on Rue de l'Université for the last time, carrying only the suitcase with the disassembled equipment and a handbag containing her Canadian passport and a ticket for a train to Brussels that had been purchased a week prior. She took a meandering route to the Gare du Nord, making 3 changes on the metro and executing several counter-surveillance maneuvers to ensure she was not being followed. She boarded the train, took her seat, and as it pulled out of the station, she did not look back at the city where she had lived a lie for 3 months. Her part of the war was over, for now. The consequences of the operation unfolded exactly as the Mossad had predicted. The French authorities were baffled. The bombing was initially treated as an act of internecine warfare between rival Palestinian factions. The sophistication of the device, with its remote trigger and precisely shaped charge, was beyond the known capabilities of any militant group at the time, leading some investigators to suspect the involvement of a state actor, but there was no evidence. The apartment on Rue de l'Université was eventually entered by the landlord after Genevieve Lambert failed to pay her next month's rent. The DST found a clean, empty apartment, devoid of any personal effects or forensic traces, a ghost residence that only deepened the mystery. For Black September and the PLO, the message was clear and terrifying. This was not a random act of violence. The assassination of a high-level, well-protected leader in his own home demonstrated an intelligence penetration and an operational reach they had not thought possible. A wave of paranoia swept through the organization's European cells. Members began to suspect one another, seeing assassins in every shadow. Communication broke down as they abandoned telephones and public meeting places. The long-term strategic value of the operation was not just the elimination of one man, but the disruption and degradation of the entire network's ability to function. The psychological cost to the operatives, however, was a debt that would be paid over a lifetime. For Dahlia, the clinical detachment required to execute the mission began to erode during her debriefing in a sterile Tel Aviv safe house. She had lived for months with the sole purpose of facilitating the death of a man she had never met, a man she knew only through grainy surveillance photos and intelligence reports. She had been an instrument, a cog in a machine of retribution, and the transformation was permanent. The ease with which she could once move between cultures was now tinged with a predatory awareness, an inability to ever fully trust the surface of things. The moral and ethical questions raised by the operation resonated far beyond the intelligence community. It was an act of extrajudicial killing on the soil of an allied nation, a calculated violation of sovereignty justified by its architects as a necessary response to an act of unimaginable brutality. It blurred the line between counterterrorism and state-sponsored assassination, setting a precedent that would shape the shadow wars of the decades to come. The operation against Mahmoud Hamshari was a success in its own cold, brutal terms, but it also marked a descent into a new kind of conflict, one fought without borders, without uniforms, and without quarter, where the price of security was a piece of the nation's own soul. Was this an act of justice for the 11 murdered athletes, Or was it simply a different form of terrorism, sanctioned by a state? Can a nation uphold its moral principles while employing the very methods used by its enemies? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story compelling, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel.